All right, so you're here because you want to understand more about these kind of troubling claims about Islamic extremism here in the US, right?
Yeah, and it's good to be cautious with this kind of information.
Exactly. So we're diving into this segment from Bill O'Reilly's show.
Where he interviews Ryan Morrow.
Right, a national security analyst for the Clarion Project. But before we get into it, just remember, this deep dive is about unpacking his claims, not endorsing him, okay?
Yeah, definitely a good idea to approach this with a critical eye.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure. We want you to form your own WN conclusions.
absolutely.
So, to give you a sense of what we're dealing with, Morrow points to specific locations, names some groups, and makes some pretty bold claims. He even uses video footage to back some of them up. Ready to dive in?
Let's go.
Okay, first up, Islamburg, New York. O'Reilly shows footage of what he calls guerrilla warfare training happening at a compound there. So, what do you make of this?
Well, Mao claims this compound is the headquarters for Muslims of the Americas, a group he links to a radical cleric in Pakistan. And he suggests there are 22 similar compounds around the country,
Wow.
possibly with a membership as high as 30,000.
And to make it even more complicated, he alleges law enforcement knows about this activity, but can't really do anything because the group isn't officially classified as a terrorist organization.
Right.
So think about that for a second. How do you balance the need to address potential threats with protecting people's civil liberties, especially in a free society?
It's a really tough question, and one that's been debated for decades. I mean, even the definition of terrorism is often really contested and politically charged.
Sure. Okay, example number 2. Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center in Falls Church, Virginia. What stands out to you with this one?
Well, the previous imam of this center, he's now an al-Qaeda member.
Okay.
And according to Morrow, the current imam advocates for Muslims to acquire arms for jihad.
Wow.
He even quotes the imam saying, Muslims should be first in line to get arms for jihad. Something like that.
That's a statement that definitely needs more scrutiny. Is it like a literal call to violence, or is there a deeper meaning, maybe something metaphorical? How much weight can we give to a single statement, without understanding the bigger context of the imam's teachings?
Right, and the historical context of that word, jihad.
Exactly. This is where your expertise comes in.
Well, you've hit on something really important. Language can be incredibly nuanced, especially when it comes to religion and political ideologies. A surface-level interpretation might completely miss the subtleties.
Okay. Next, the Masjid at-Taqwa Mosque in Brooklyn, led by Siraj Wahhaj. Now, Mara describes Wahhaj as one of the most radical imams in the country, but he also seems to have a pretty significant following and influence. How do we make sense of that?
It is a paradox, isn't it?
Mm,
Could it be that what Morrow sees as radical actually resonates with some Muslim Americans for totally different reasons?
interesting.
Maybe there are different interpretations within the community about what's acceptable, religiously and politically.
And to add to that, Wahhaj Mosque actually sued the NYPD over surveillance practices, which brings us back to that tension between security and freedom.
Exactly, it raises the question. How do law enforcement agencies walk that fine line? Protecting national security, but also respecting the rights of individuals and groups.
Especially in a diverse country like the US.
Right.
Okay, shifting gears to Queens, New York, Morrow talks about the Islamic Circle of North America, an organization he says advocates for, get this, deception to advance the cause of jihad and Sharia law.
Hmm.
But here's the thing. He cites polls that say only about 2% of Muslim Americans feel represented by this group.
That's really interesting. It speaks volumes, I think, about the different viewpoints within the Muslim American community.
Right. It challenges that like one-dimensional view we often see in the media.
Exactly. It's just there's a much richer, more nuanced spectrum of beliefs within that population.
So we're seeing a pattern here. These groups, even though they have some things in common, don't really represent the views of all Muslim Americans.
Exactly. We can't make sweeping generalizations. The Muslim American experience is as diverse as any other group in the country.
And to understand this issue, we have to acknowledge that complexity.
Absolutely.
All right, now, for Marrow's most controversial claim, his accusation against the Council on American Islamic Relations, Hey I.
This one's striking because KR is a pretty well-known organization, often seen as moderate.
They've even been on O'Reilly's show before.
Right.
So what's he saying?
He's claiming that KR is basically a political arm of the Muslim Brotherhood, which he then links to Hamas.
Oh.
He even cites Justice Department documents to support his claim.
But it's important to remember the source here. Marrow works for the Clarion Project.
An organization that's known for its critical stance on Islam.
So this raises a big question for you listening. How do we really critically evaluate information, especially when it comes from sources that might have strong biases?
It's about going deeper than the headlines. Who are these people? What are they trying to achieve? And maybe most importantly, what evidence do they have? And is there any evidence that contradicts their claims?
It's about being a smart consumer of information, especially in a world where it's so easy to be manipulated.
Absolutely.
Okay, so after all these examples, O'Reilly pulls up a map that shows all these supposed radical Muslim operations across the U.S., right? And he asks Marrow straight up, should Americans be worried?
And Mauro says that just watching these groups isn't enough. He thinks we need to address the ideology itself.
So he's calling on Muslim leaders to actively counter what he sees as these, like, radical interpretations of Islam.
Yeah. Suggesting that the solution has to come from within the Muslim community.
But how would that even be received by different Muslim Americans?
Right. Would they agree with Maro's take on the problem? Or his solution?
That's a really complex question because we can't forget the Muslim American community is not a monolith.
Absolutely. There's a huge range of perspectives on things like religious interpretation, political engagement, and even what extremism means.
All right, so we've covered a lot here. We've heard some pretty concerning claims from Ryan Marrow about possible Islamic extremism in the U.S.
Right.
But remember, this is just one side of a very complicated story.
It's crucial to remember that Marrow, even though he presents himself as an expert, has a particular viewpoint.
Right. What are the other perspectives? What are the counter arguments? How do we go beyond this one segment and get a more balanced understanding?
A good place to start would be to research the groups and people he mentioned.
Yeah.
Look for sources that offer different viewpoints and interpretations.
And it's about actively seeking out information that challenges our assumptions.
Exactly.
Broadening our understanding of this complex issue and accepting that simple answers are, well, often hard to come by.
Yeah, and maybe, most importantly, talking to people who hold different views. Really listening to their perspectives.
Trying to understand their concerns and where we can, finding some common ground.
Right.
So this deep dive has given us a lot to consider, but it also leaves us with a final, thought-provoking question.
Yeah, how do we balance national security with religious freedom in a democratic society? This question is at the heart of all of this. It's something we all have to wrestle with as we navigate these complex and often sensitive issues. And it's a question, really, with no easy answers. Democracies all over the world are dealing with it.
It's like walking a tightrope. And Marrow seems to think that part of the answer is like within the Muslim community itself, right?
Yeah.
He brings up that poll, the one that shows low support for these organizations among Muslim Americans.
Right.
Like, he's suggesting that most Muslims in the U.S. would actually reject these more extreme views. What do you think about that?
Well, it'd be easy to just, feel reassured by those polls. Like, okay, problem solved. It's just a small fringe group.
Right.
But I think we got to be careful with that kind of data. Polls can be tricky. Well, the way questions are worded, who they ask, that all makes a difference.
Right.
And even if the numbers are accurate, just because people reject certain groups doesn't mean they reject the whole ideology.
So it's not that simple. Like, low support doesn't automatically equal no problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even within that 2% who might agree with these organizations.
There was probably a whole range of beliefs and reasons why, right?
Absolutely. Some might be drawn to the political side, others to the social or religious aspects.
It's complicated.
It's a complex tapestry.
Yeah.
And if we just focus on a poll number, we risk oversimplifying things.
We're talking about people, right? Each with their own story.
Of course.
What could make someone turn to these ideologies? Are there like social or economic things that make those ideas more appealing?
Those are the questions, aren't they?
Yeah.
We need to dig deeper into what pushes and pulls people towards certain beliefs. Do they feel marginalized, disenfranchised?
Like they don't have opportunities.
Exactly. Could that make those ideologies seem more attractive? Are there leaders who take advantage of that?
And then how do you address those root problems without, like, accidentally making things worse, fueling the very ideologies you're trying to fight?
It's a delicate balance, for sure.
Yeah.
We need to create a society where everyone feels valued, respected, like they can actually participate.
Give people a sense of belonging, real opportunities, so they're not as susceptible to those, extremist narratives that prey on their anxieties.
Exactly. And this
Yeah.
is where education and open dialogue becomes so important.
We have to be willing to have those tough conversations, to challenge our own
To
biases.
really try and understand people who think differently.
I couldn't agree more. It's through those conversations, through sharing different perspectives, that we can start to close the gaps between us and find common ground.
Right?
It's about empathy, seeing our shared humanity, working together to build a better, fairer world for everyone.
I agree.
But how do we even do that in a world where information's like weaponized?
Right.
Where we get stuck in echo chambers online and it's hard to tell what's real and what's not. How do we learn to think critically in this crazy environment?
It's tough.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. But I think it starts with, fostering a healthy sense of skepticism. Encourage people to question everything, to look for evidence, to get multiple perspectives.
Become like information detectives.
Exactly. Don't just take things at face value. Look at the source. What are their biases, their motives? Find other reputable sources that back up what they're saying. Pay attention to the language used. Are they using emotionally charged words to, sway your opinion?
It's like being aware that words have power. They can be used to shape how we see things and make us think a certain way.
Absolutely. And just because something's presented as factual, objective, doesn't mean it is.
Right.
Be extra careful with information that already fits your beliefs.
It's easy to just accept things that confirm what you already think, right?
That's confirmation bias in action.
So we have to be honest with ourselves,
Mm.
acknowledge our own biases, and be open to being challenged.
Exactly. It's about intellectual humility, recognizing that we don't have all the answers. We could be wrong.
And what about when we're talking to people who disagree with us? How do you have those conversations in a way that's, actually productive? Especially now when everything feels so polarized.
It's getting harder and harder, that's for sure. But I think it starts with being willing to listen, to really hear the other person's point of view, even if you don't like it.
Trying to see where they're coming from?
Yeah. What shaped their beliefs? What do they value? And then talk about the issues, not the person. Focus on finding common ground. Maybe you disagree on the details, but you share some bigger goals or values.
Building bridges, not walls.
Right. Remembering we're all human. And look, it's okay to agree to disagree. You don't have to convince everyone.
Sometimes just understanding each other is enough, right?
Sometimes that's a win in itself.
We need more of that. Respectful disagreement, where we can talk about tough stuff without attacking each other.
Absolutely. Disagreement can be a good thing. It can make you think, challenge your own beliefs.
So as we wrap up this part of the conversation, what are some key things for our listeners to take away? What can they do to keep learning about this and come to their own conclusions?
First thing, look at everything with a critical eye.
Uh-huh.
Don't just passively take in information. Question the source, the evidence, get different perspectives.
Be in charge of your own learning. You never stop learning, right?
Right. This is complicated. There's no easy answer. No one story explains everything about Islamic extremism.
So embrace the complexity. Don't oversimplify things. There's always more to learn.
And as you learn, I encourage you to talk to Muslim Americans directly. Hear their stories, their experiences, their perspectives.
Go beyond the headlines, connect with real people, build relationships. That's how we understand each other.
Exactly. It's through those personal connections that we can break down stereotypes and build a more inclusive and fair society.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. We've explored Mauro's claims about Islamic extremism here in the U.S.,
We've talked about how to interpret religious and political language,
the challenge of balancing security and freedom.
and how important it is to think critically in a world full of information.
We've highlighted the need for respectful conversations, empathy, and seeing things from different points of view, especially those that challenge our own beliefs.
So, as we close this deep dive, we'll leave you with one final thought.
How can you, as someone who's informed and engaged, contribute to a better, fairer world? A world where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered.
That's a question we all need to think about, individually and together.
And it's a challenge that really goes beyond just this one issue or this one community, right?
Absolutely. It's about building a culture of critical thinking, empathy, having these respectful dialogues, in all parts of our lives.
And realizing that the answers to these really big problems, they don't usually come from just one place or one point of view.
It takes collaboration. being open to different ideas, and being willing to talk to people who, might see things differently.
So before we wrap up this whole deep dive into Marrow's claims, there are a few last things we want you to keep in mind.
First off, remember that what Marrow's saying, even though it gives us a lot to think about, is just one piece of a much bigger picture.
Yeah, there are so many other voices and experiences and perspectives out there.
Don't be afraid to, question the information you come across.
Yeah, ask those questions, do your own research, look for other viewpoints.
And get involved in your community.
Have those hard conversations, even if they're uncomfortable.
Listen to people who believe different things than you do. Try to build those bridges of understanding.
Because it's in those conversations, those moments of genuine connection, that we can start to, dismantle stereotypes, get to the root of the problem, and create a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Exactly. This deep dive wasn't just about looking at this one segment on TV. It was about giving you the tools to navigate this world of information overload, to think for yourselves, to figure out what you believe.
Remember, knowledge is power.
And learning is a lifelong journey. So keep asking those hard questions. Keep looking for different perspectives, and keep trying to understand this complicated world we live in. That's how we build a better future together.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this is giving you a lot to think about.